well, I just said I was gonna do the pre-intro, but like, holy
What?
fuck, I had a burp, man. I had a burp. It was one of those ones that like shakes your chest when you have it. It's like, oh god.
Oh,
You-
Yeah. It's either that or I'm just getting old, and like even the smallest burps get to me now. Hi friends, welcome back to the InkGuild Podcast. I'm Dean, joined today by Alex and Gabe, and today we're just going to go straight into our topic of writing pet peeves. And it's kind of funny that I wanted to talk about this topic because of my first pick, but I think I'm getting a little bit too ahead of myself. So what we mean by writing pet peeves is just things, like really little things about like storytelling, writing and reading, which kind of annoy us. And I know that that's such a pretty broad topic in and of itself because storytelling is so much more than books lately. So to narrow down our focus, we're going to be talking about writing and reading pet peeves specifically. So we're not going to be looking at pet peeves in movies and pet peeves in video games and stuff like that. And so I guess just like going straight into it, my first pet peeve was something that I was guilty of with my first draft of my book, and those are adjectives. And when, like, I don't know about you guys, but for me, adjectives really, really bother me, especially when it's coming out of my work, because when I was thinking about it earlier today, and that's why I said, like, I wanted to talk about this, because earlier today I was looking on some of my previous drafts, and so much of it has been, or so much of my descriptions have strictly been adjectives, which really, it hindered me from describing the scene out in a more fleshed out kind of imaginative way. If I just had an adjective there, then like it really limits just how much one person can see the scene. It's so vague. Like, and me personally, like, I don't want that to be my kind of story. Like, I want my own imagination, and I want my own kind of like, I want my own world to come alive through description and imagery. And with adjectives in my drafts, I hate it. I really hate it. And I guess even like some other people's work, like some, like, I think with like YA, for example, they do a pretty good balance of really detailed imagery and adjectives for just kind of pushing the scene along. But if there are other writers out there that are just using adjectives, it bugs me so much, because it's like I'm keeping a tally of how many adjectives there are, and like, man, this could have been a really good scene, but it's just boiled down by adjectives. I don't know, I guess that's just me. What do you guys think?
I find I don't tend to notice them a lot when I'm reading things, actually.
Yeah. And I guess, like, for those listening, I guess to put into my mindset, like, what I mean by an adjective is like ly, or words or description words that end in ly.
Okay.
Yeah. What do you mean, Alex? What do you mean that you don't tend to notice them that often? If I can ask.
Just like, to be fair, it's been a while since I've read like an actual book. But I don't, like, when I'm reading, I don't tend to notice those words. I don't know if that's just because I read writers that don't use them, or if I just don't see them. Like, honestly, like, I can't, like, off the top of my head, I'm not imagining like seeing those a lot in the books that I read.
Mm. Well, then I guess you're reading good books.
I guess so.
Yeah. Like, Gabe, how about you? What do you think on adjectives?
I'm okay with adjectives as long as as long as it doesn't feel like something is spending an absurd amount of time like giving me a billion different adjectives to describe something. Like I think like if I feel like that I feel like I can get an idea of something fairly quickly. I don't need a lot of different adjectives to describe something. Like let's just move on, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like if people use them sparingly, then it's okay.
Well, then I guess everyone is just doing it properly, but me.
I say this, but I'm also the world's biggest hypocrite.
like
You've read my writing. You know the person I am. You know how many times that I will use similar sounding adjectives twice in a row to describe the same object.
Yeah, that's why personally for me it's such a bother.
Yeah.
Like I guess especially just in my own writing, because apparently, like I said, everyone else is doing it properly instead of me. Like when I was looking at my first draft, it was like, I know better now because the scenes are a lot more fleshed out. They have a lot more imagination and color to them, basically. But in place of that, in the first draft were adjectives that were super generic, super basic. It didn't really have that much color to the scene. Like it just kind of vaguely, like it gave the interpretation to people reading it that like, here, you can imagine the scene how you want it. And I guess over time, having those adjectives there kind of hindered me from showing off my own kind of creativity. And
I feel like that's a writer thing where like when you're like young as a writer, you're kind of like, oh well, I want everyone to be able to relate to this. So maybe if I write it a little bit vague, they'll be able to put themselves into it, and then it'll be like that. But then you get older or like more experienced, and you're like, well, this is my story, this is my vision. I want people to see it how I see it, and then the more specific you get, better.
That's exactly the point. Like over time, once I've gotten like more confident in storytelling and imagery, I suddenly didn't need an adjective, or I suddenly didn't need the use of adjectives that much, if at all. So when I look back on my old work, it's like, it's annoying. Like it's a pet peeve for sure. Alex, how about you? What would be one of your first of many pet peeves? First of many,
well,
first of two. I don't know.
Like I said, I haven't been reading like a lot of like actual like published works recently, but like this time comes up time and time again in like fanfic.
Oh fuck! Discord cut out again. I need to remedy this.
Especially a big one.
Alex,
they'll have like
Alex.
Yes.
Discord cut out for me.
Oh no.
Yeah, so I am gonna try doing this for the first or for a while. So what I'm doing is this: I'm on my phone, and you guys are through speaker, and we're recording from my own audio. So
Okay.
in the case that Discord cuts out for me, then at least we'll have this, and we're back. Holy shit!
We're back.
Yeah. So if Discord decides to cut out on me, I'm fucking ready.
It's good to know.
Anyway, I guess let's just bring it back. So, what would your first pet peeve be? Writing pet peeve be?
Yeah. Now I have to remember what I said. Okay. Like I said, I haven't been reading a lot of published works recently, but something that I see come up a lot in fan fiction and like unpublished works and first drafts is people don't know how to use punctuation properly. And that drives me crazy.
Just even thinking about it is making me cringe.
Yeah, it drives me crazy. Just like if you don't know how to use a certain kind of punctuation, look it up.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Just like, because I find when I'm reading something and I see like there's a comma in the wrong spot, or like people are misusing like quotation marks, it just like pulls me right out of the story, and it takes me a while to get like back into it, just because I'm just like, just do it properly. Um,
Yeah.
but I know it's probably easier said than done. But seriously, if you don't know how to use a certain kind of punctuation, look it up. Even if you're like a little bit uncertain,
Mm-hmm.
look it up.
Yeah. Uh, it's funny you bring up punctuation because one of my other pet peeves is on one specific use of it. But like you say that because you're reading a lot of fan fiction, like how different is that compared to some of the published works that you're familiar with in terms of like how bad it is?
It varies. Um, like there's some fan fiction that's probably better than published works, than certain published works. Because I mean, like any community, there's different levels of skill in fan fiction, and some people are like brilliant writers, and some people are definitely struggling a little bit more, to
Mm-hmm.
the point that I find some fics like completely unreadable just because of like the grammar and punctuation errors.
Yeah. Oh God, it's honestly like I ask because it's so hard to kind of understand it. Like obviously when it comes to like published works, like you have multiple editors probably at a time looking at your work, making sure all your punctuation is working. Um and I know that there's like creative uses for like using punctuation, but it still works. It's still meant to work. If you don't know how to use a colon if you don't know how to use a colon though, and you're just using it like for whatever, it's so obvious that you
Yeah.
don't know how to use it.
Yeah, no, yeah, commas. I remember in one of my university classes in my first year of university, we spent a literal like entire 2 hour class period talking about commas. And I remember at the time being so frustrated because I was just like, who doesn't know how to use commas? Like I've known how to use commas forever. And like now actually like reading people's work, I'm like, oh, people really don't know how to use commas at all.
Okay, question: do you have an opinion on the Oxford comma?
It's a good thing and we need it.
Okay, I agree. Just wanted
It
to
it,
ask
it
because
clarifies it. Like if you without it there's unnecessary confusion.
yeah,
We need Oxford comma. It is a necessity.
we really do.
I
Like
stand by that.
that's the biggest injustice. We need Oxford commas regularly. Anyway, like I guess going back to
I've stood by that since before I knew what an Oxford comma was.
yeah, honestly though, I had been using commas pretty much regularly before I even knew that that's what an Oxford comma was, or before I even knew what Oxford comma was. Yeah, like same. Anyway,
Yeah.
um, yeah, like I know it can be difficult as, especially if you're writing, like if you're starting to write or if you're taking it seriously for the first time, to understand how ellipses work or understand how dashes, colons, semicolons, especially, like it can be really confusing.
There's also like three different kinds of dashes, which is also confusing. Which
Yeah,
is why I say people like as a writer, like this is the same thing for like artists in general. Like no matter what, like we can't be afraid to look things up in order to further our understanding of them.
yeah.
Sometimes you just don't know things, and the only way to like learn things is to
This is a
Welcome
mess.
back.
This is a mess. It did like Discord like connected to my phone because I had it out just in case I was preparing if it was gonna disconnect or not, and then suddenly it was like, "Oh, you're on your phone now? Okay."
Is it still doing it on your new computer?
Like cutting out?
Yeah,
Yeah. Like it cut out.
that's weird.
Like it cut out as soon as Alex pretty much started her point. But anyway, let's not dwell on that right now because if not, I don't want this to suddenly become an entire episode on just my issues with Discord. uh Going back to what you were saying though, Alex, yeah, you're right. Like we have the technology to look up how to use these things properly.
Yeah.
And if anything, like I understand trial and error. If you don't think this is working, or if you don't know if your punctuation's working, then ask someone. Refer
Oh.
to refer to refer to different websites or books that can teach you if you are using it properly. Don't just submit something without knowing if your punctuation is good or not, because people will notice.
Yeah, I feel like it's an artist thing to have this sort of like pride almost, where you feel like you should know how to do stuff without having to look it up.
Mm-hmm.
And like I feel like I feel like that applies to writers. It applies to like artists and stuff. It applies to like, I mean, it probably applies to like everyone in general. But like, I feel like as a society, we need to move past that point of pride and recognize that it's impossible for one person to know everything, and that there's no shame in having to look something up.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially
Way good about this.
It's meant to think like punctuation is not just meant to, make sure everything's in line and make sure like all your sentences work, but if used effectively, then it can create some amazing moments.
Yeah.
Like, it can be used to like really add a lot of drama to a scene if you place a period correctly, or if you do this or do that with a dash. Like, just know how to do it properly, everyone.
Yeah.
This is coming from someone who isn't even published. Like, do your shit.
Yeah, and it takes practice, like everything, but also you can't break the rules until you know them. So learn your rules.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Gabe, how about you? What would your first pick be?
To introduce my first pick, I'm going to read an excerpt.
Okay.
From Ready Player One.
Oh
Okay.
Boy. All right.
I made a big entrance when I arrived in my flying DeLorean, which I'd obtained by completing a Back to the Future quest on the planet Zemeckis. The DeLorean came outfitted with a non-functioning flux capacitor, but I'd made several additions to its equipment and appearance. First, I'd installed an artificially intelligent onboard computer named Kit, purchased in an online auction, into the dashboard, along with a matching red Knight Rider scanner just above the DeLorean's grille. Then I'd outfitted the car with an oscillation overthruster, a device that allowed me to travel through solid matter. Finally, to complete my 80s super vehicle theme, I'd slapped a Ghostbusters logo on each of the DeLorean's gull-winged doors, then added personalized plates that read Ecto-88. So, my first pet peeve is over-referencing.
Okay. I thought it was gonna be the use of like. Okay, first of all, like I'll let you explain in a second, but I swear to God, I thought it was gonna be like listing things like that, like
It's
essay
that
listing.
too. It's that too, but that is another thing. But I think the biggest thing for me with Ready Player One is the over reliance on pop culture references.
Yeah,
That's something that bugs the ever loving shit out of me, especially in science fiction literature, but in any sort of like in anything really, an over reliance on like pop culture references to relate to a scene always really bugs me, because it makes me feel like the author isn't confident that we can relate to this scene on our own, so they need to connect it to something that someone else made, so that we can be like, oh, I know that thing, this guy knows that thing, I'm relating to this now, that's how this works.
Yeah.
But then it also creates this issue, especially with science fiction literature that's set in the future. I think the even bigger thing that always throws me the fuck off whenever there's like pop culture references is, and I know this is a stupid thing to get hung up on, because I'm not going to expect people to come up with this sort of stuff, but like, was there no new pop culture media created in the span of time between when the book is published and when the story takes place for these characters?
Yeah, there's that, but also it super dates a book. So like if a book references something that like that's really big at the moment, well, in like 5 years, that probably no one's even going to remember that anymore.
No. and it's especially jarring if that book is set in the future. So it's like you're watching a movie that's set. Let's say for example a movie that's set, or you're reading a book that's set 50 years from now, and they make constant callbacks to modern pop culture references or 90s or 80s pop culture references, that it dates it, and it gives it this weird aura that nothing new has been created in this time span, because no one makes like relevant pop culture references. Everyone always talks about just the very, very conveniently the books and movies that came out at the time of the book's publishing.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that every time that I see it, it always pulls me right out. And what's even worse is that a lot of the time that I see it, it's like in really inappropriate places. It's often in that sort of, like what I was just reading. It's not in like a character. I think if someone is in dialogue and they might make a passing reference to something, that's more or less within the realm of acceptable. But I think if it's in a description, that's more jarring, because it also makes me feel like this author doesn't know how to describe this scene or this character on their own. There was this one book that I read a while back about a group of meth addicts, and I kept on getting distracted so often because the book would make constant callbacks to how its protagonist looked like Ewan McGregor in Trainspotting, and I was like, am I going to get no actual character description on how this? I'm just going to get Ewan McGregor in Trainspotting? Is that what you're telling me? Mm-hmm. It was just Trainspotting this, Trainspotting that, and I'm like, I haven't fucking seen Trainspotting.
Yeah.
That's the other problem. It's like, if you haven't seen the thing that it's referencing, then using a reference as a description defeats the purpose, because I've now had to put the book down to Google what it's referencing so I can understand what it's describing. It makes what should be a very quick process of just describing an object and giving a visual idea for the reader into this whole process of, okay, well, now I got to take out my phone and I got to Google this super obscure reference, and I gotta find out what this thing looks like so that I know what this thing looks like in the book that they want me to know how it looks like.
Yeah.
And by that point, I'm like, I'll just read something else. Fuck it. I'll do anything else. I have Xenoblade to play, bro.
Also, I feel like using an actor or like a celebrity to describe a main character in a book is like kind of a bad move in general. Yeah. Like, I mean, if you're gonna like do that for like a passing character, like, oh, I looked up and saw someone that looked like Taylor Swift or whatever, and then that character is never seen again or whatever, I feel like that's not a big deal. But if it's the main character of the book, I feel like you kind of want to like have a unique vision of that character.
Yeah.
I guess people just really wanted their main character to be played by Ewan McGregor in like a live action adaptation.
Yeah.
You're so right, though. It's such a jarring thing, especially like if you are setting your own world and you are still referencing the things that are happening here on Earth, especially pop culture things. It's like, what the fuck? How do these people know? Like, how do these people know these things?
Yeah, I think the only situation in which I'm sort of okay with pop culture references is like, I guess you could call them period pieces now because it's been long enough, but anything that's set, like, if it's something in the 80s or something, I think I'm more okay with it, because if it's deliberately being set in the past, then it's already dating itself by its own existence. So I'm more or less okay. Like, no one's going to make new 80s content. All the 80s content has already been made, you know?
Yeah.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like, to elaborate on this, like, yeah, I absolutely agree. That is a pet peeve. Like, there's such a disconnect as soon as you reference something when you could have just built your own, like, scene out of it, right? Like, it would be like, why would you reference something when you could have easily just built your own scene, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're going to talk about some awesome weapon, for example, to compare it to a lightsaber, just use your own description. Right, like even if it is actually just a lightsaber, then at least describe it differently. Don't be like it's a lightsaber from Star Wars. There's like this mystical object used by like Space Knights or something, like everyone's probably going to already guess that it's Star Wars. Like,
Yeah.
as a writer, there is so much potential to be very creative with your with your output. Like, it doesn't always have to be perfect at first, but that's how we learn, right? We use we start somewhere.
Yeah.
And I guess to play devil's advocate a little bit, there's nothing wrong with using references as a head start. Like, if you want to insert it as a placeholder, right? Like, going back to the lightsaber thing, like, you're trying to describe this awesome weapon. It's like a lightsaber. But eventually you would then need to just take that out and then work in your own details afterwards. Like, you don't want to leave that in there. You don't want to leave that in there.
Going back to like my writer artist comparison that I used in my last one, I feel like using pop culture as like a reference point is like a good way, but like then you take, like, for example, a lightsaber, and instead of saying it's a lightsaber, describe the lightsaber.
Yeah, like,
then like you have something visual that you're actually looking at, and that can be really helpful because sometimes it's hard to just pull things out of thin air and describe that. Yeah, again, if you're referencing a lightsaber in your book, I hope it's because your character bought like a lightsaber toy at Walmart or something.
Yeah, like there's no reason why you should be referencing a lightsaber in your fantasy story or your own original sci-fi story. There's no merit for it. Anyway, I guess moving on to our next set of picks. This one, or my next set, is again one that I'm guilty of, but it's also like one of my favorite authors is also guilty of this, and that is the overuse of ellipses, or the ellipse. So, I guess if you don't, like, to the casual listeners who are listening, an ellipse is the 3 dots that often would come before a pause, or at least that's how a lot of people would kind of mishandle it. Like, ellipses have often used to pause a scene. Have I been cut out again?
Oh, you're good.
Oh my god, I was panicking. Yeah.
Don't worry.
So yeah, a lot of people, or at least how I have kind of been familiar with it, writers have been using ellipses to pause and then continue the thought on from there, which is, surprisingly, when I first found out about it, not how you're supposed to do it. Like, you can use a dash to indicate a pause, especially in speech. Like, it's something that bugs me when I'm when I'm reading dialogue and then someone uses an ellipses as a pause instead of using a dash. Like, I know that now, but I say this is a pet peeve of mine because I'm guilty of it. Because, again, in my first draft of my book, I would use ellipses for pauses, and after later knowing better, it's like, yeah, this doesn't work out. This doesn't indicate a pause as well as I think it will. Like, I would just then use dashes, and if even, like, I didn't even need to use it at all. Like, ellipses can be meant for powerful scenes, and they can be meant for pretty subtle moments, actually. But suddenly, if you're overusing it every page or something, it's so noticeable, and it's really irritating. And
with most grammar, or with most punctuation, I think if you overuse it, like anything other than, like, you know, a period and a comma, if you overuse it, it just loses its effect immediately. Yeah, and I guess for me with ellipses, like, I stated my personal reasons to as to why it annoys me, but I guess to reflect on someone else's work, Sarah J. Maas is very synonymous with using ellipses in her works. Like, and M dashes. Yeah, but that's not what this is about, though. But yeah, it's so frequent. Like, I've counted maybe like 6-7 like use of ellipses in one page of one of her books, and believe me, this is not to, like, knock on Sarah J. Maas. I'm not Alex, but like, I'm not her, but it is so apparent when you are using ellipses, and at least when Sarah J. Maas does it, I can understand
like how it's used then. I understand how she is using it, and I understand pretty much just how it works, but that doesn't exclude just how much of it is. Like, I'm pretty sure if you were to take all the ellipses from a Sarah J. Maas book, it would consist of maybe a fifth of that entire story or that of that entire run. Like, because
I think people use them because when people write things that they want to be dramatic, people tend to lean in towards like the melodramatic side, and I think overuse of ellipses would definitely fall into melodrama.
Yeah. Like, there's nothing wrong with like like, I understand that if you're incorporating natural pause in speech, like an M dash would probably be the best way to do it, not an ellipses. How I've used an ellipses is kind of concluding off a thought or concluding off a section and then maybe bringing it back to the character. And I know that that's hard to explain, and I don't really have I'll try to find a way to incorporate it somehow, but just don't overuse it.
For me, it's always been you use them to like when you're like trailing off.
Yeah.
Like if you're not
that's
like
a good way of using it. Yeah.
You're not like quite completing your thought, but like you're like just like almost finishing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some other people, like if you're doing that, like using an ellipses is a good way to trail off things, and using an M dash for some certain situations, like you could even use that to like put a quick break into a really subtle moment and then go immediately into action.
Yeah.
Right. And
that's like what you use when you're cutting off a thought.
Yeah. So oftentimes whenever people overuse an ellipses, like I'm pretty sure they may be using it properly, especially those that are published by big companies. Like an ellipses or an ellipsis, much like other punctuation, can be used, I guess, artistically, but overusing it is very apparent. And even if you're using it and it's working, it's still like I play like a game of tally, just how many times I count an ellipses on a single page. So
again, if you don't know how to use punctuation, look it up.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Alex, do you have a second one?
The second one that I wrote down was forced heteronormativity.
Okay. All right. Please explain.
I can use Sarah J. Maas's books as a really good example of this, in that like I feel like a lot of authors, especially in YA novels, I've noticed, tend to use. Okay, what I mean by forced heteronormativity is like you have, no matter how many people are in the story, they always end up paired off like a guy and a girl, a guy and a girl, a guy and a girl. And I'm like, if you have straight people in your stories, whatever, that's fine. But not everyone needs to be in a relationship. And then this is where Sarah J. Maas in particular, I think, is really bad for this, is that a lot of times authors will like twist their characters' personalities just so that they fit into a more heteronormative couple. Mm-hmm. Where like the guy is like the aggressive, protective type, and the woman is like the delicate, I need someone to protect me type, even if that doesn't like necessarily fit that character's actual personalities. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah, she's definitely guilty of that.
Yeah, to the point that she does that so much. To be fair, I think J.K. Rowling has also done that a little bit. Like Rick Riordan is kind of bad for that. Mm-hmm. Like so many authors do this, and I think at this point it's become such a norm that a lot of people don't even realize it when they're writing. But like when you're reading, it's really apparent, where you're like, wow, there's another couple, like to the point where if you're reading a long series, you see the first book and you see like all the main characters listed out, and you're like, okay, so those two are going to end up together and those two are going to end up together. And every time I've done this, I'm almost always right.
Yeah. Yeah, personally, I am tired of seeing straight couples in YA. Because
there's that too, yeah.
Yeah, and
I'm tired of seeing straight couples. Full stop.
Yeah, this is entirely a thing. Like, this is entirely like my own personal opinion, but I would love, and I need to see more LGBT like relationships in YA specifically, because there are a lot of LGBT youth.
Yes,
that goes hand in hand.
I also agree with that, like 100%.
Yeah.
But I also feel like part of forced heteronormativity for me is displaying what I think is a really unhealthy like representation of straight relationships, even that I feel like is, well, it's negative to like LGBT youth because they're not seeing themselves represented, but it's also negative for like straight youth because they're seeing the same picture over and over again of like the dominant male and the submissive female. And like obviously some people's relationships are gonna be like that, hopefully in a healthy way. But some people's relationships are not gonna be like that. And I feel like there needs to be more variety in straight relationships in YA works as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it like if you can count like how many like notable YA stories feature like a prominently gay couple.
Also, Cassandra Clare is also bad for this.
Yeah, like and I don't know why. Like that's a mystery in and of itself. But like I personally need to see a breaking of that kind of forced heteronormativity, as you say. Like definitely that needs to change more so, because like times are definitely changing, and a lot of people are opening themselves up to newer stories, right? Where it's not a forced heteronormative couple.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, also, sometimes you don't need the romance. I hate to break it to you, but sometimes you do not need the romance in your story.
Yeah, like there are other things in a youth's life aside from wanting to hook up. Or aside from wanting a relationship. There's so many other things to worry about.
You have like a teenager who's in the middle of fighting a war. Do you really think that like romance is the number one thing on their mind?
Yeah. And that's, I guess, like a whole other like pet peeve of mine is romantic subplots, but you know, that's not my final one anyway. But just if you're going to, and this is not to say like I want every single book from now on to feature only LGBT couples, because that would, you know, again, it would just go back to not everyone or not every person in a book needs to be in a relationship. And I guess as more people are reading, and I guess as more like LGBTQ plus you know, I guess as more youth in general are reading books, it's good to see a lot more diversity that is organic and it's natural. Like, don't force anything, especially like, and you know, I'm not hating entirely on straight couples, like it's fine, but like when you do it with every single character, it almost makes it predictable. Yeah, like you know that this character is going to hook up with that character just because, oh, it's a guy and a girl, or it's playing off of the same kind of archetypes as a male character or as a female character that would eventually be together anyway. Like, don't do that. Mix up the formula.
Yeah, exactly. And also, since we're on the topic of LGBT youth, you know, some people are like asexual and aromantic, and sometimes they would also
yeah. I guess just in general too, like I was about to say abolish romantic subplots, but I don't mean it.
Yes.
Just if you like, know that.
Let's do it. No more horny in my fiction.
If you want horny in your fiction, go read horny fiction.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have whole genres specifically for that.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't want to see like bat people fucking in the air when there's a war going on. Cough, cough. Like a court of thorns and roses. I see your fucking bullshit. Anyway, just anyway.
This just the Call Sarah J. Maas Out episode.
I don't mean to. I love her work. I really like her work. Oh god, I'm digging myself into a hole. Anyway, Gabe, do you have a second pick?
Simps.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry?
My second pick is simps. It's.
You're gonna have to give us more, man. I'm like, are you talking about like character simps or like audience simps?
I had a more
forced heteronormative simps. Like,
I had a more intellectual way to describe this, but I thought that would be better to just
it's
go
a clip.
right in.
Yeah, it's a clip.
So what I'm talking about is sort of tangentially related to what you're talking about, Alex, which is I call them simps because it's an easy way to refer to them. But what I'm talking about is characters whose entire character arc and whose entire dynamic with other characters is predicated on whether or not they bone their romance interest by the end of the book. And that's all they care about, and that's all that there is. That's their one-armed man. That's all that matters to them. They don't have a personality outside of that. They don't have goals or dreams outside of that. They want to either it's usually straight characters too that does this. I've never seen a gay character whose entire role is that they have to get with the partners. It's either again, Ready Player One, the main character's whole thing. Like, he has a goal in the main plot, I guess, but most of the book is focused on the fact that he has a crush on Gamer Girl Supreme, and he spends the whole book, like, he meets her, and then that's another thing. He meets her, and then he's in love with her, and he is devoted to her, and he wants to, like, spend the rest of his life with her after one meeting. That's simp shit, and I'm sick of seeing it.
I can't blame you at all. Yikes.
Yeah. Now that you've explained it, I absolutely 100% agree. I hate that so much.
Yeah.
Like, it's the crux of why I've stopped watching, like, I guess, like, harem anime. And I'm putting that down right now. Yes, I did used to watch that shit, but first of all, like, I wasn't really watching a lot of anime at the time, and harem anime was all over Netflix. I'm like, fuck it, I'll just do this. So, Discord's like, you what? You fucking loser. See, this is what happens when you confess to watching harem anime. Discord just cuts you out because they don't tolerate that shit.
The gods of Olympus have abandoned me.
Anyway, I guess while I'm currently disconnected, yeah, I like that annoys me so much. I hate like that kind of predatory nature in general. I can't deal with that, dude.
I don't even know if I'm talking about. I see this a lot in like romantic comedy. Not even just. I don't know if we're allowed to talk about other forms of media. Are we?
If it helps illustrate your point, I'll make the exception.
Yeah, because
there's no really exception anyway. I'm just making up the rules as I go along.
I do see this a lot in. I don't read a lot of romantic fiction, but I see it a lot in romantic comedies where the main character, if the main character is a woman, then their whole role is to be obsessed with the man, with
that
the male lead
so much, yeah.
And if the male lead is the protagonist, then the female lead spends the whole movie being obsessed with her. There's no mutuality in their relationship. There's nothing like, neither of them are actually people. They're just they're these caricatures of relationships, and I hate seeing it. It bugs me so much.
Yeah. It's so annoying. We were talking about like forced heteronormativity. Like, storytelling has like progressed way beyond that. It has progressed way beyond like one chasing after the other in that behavior. Like, it's so terrible. And becoming obsessed with the character. Like, I get it in romantic comedies, like that's kind of what happens in general, and even then I'm not okay with it anymore. But I guess in terms of like fiction and an anime, like,
Mhm.
or in anime and manga, it's just like it's still prevalent because fan service and whatever. But
Ugh.
exactly, yeah, it's bothersome.
Yeah, it's very annoying. You do see this a lot in anime as well, where there's just a character who's like the crux of their whole character, and even not even just in harem and in like harem, but like just anime in general. There's usually one thing that I noticed a lot is there's I don't know if there's a specific trope name for this, but there's like one if it's like a pretty boy protagonist like Kogias, then there's usually one girl character who's a supporting character whose whole role is to be obsessed with the pretty boy.
Yeah.
Like I like Shirley in Code Geass or Misa in Death Note.
Yeah.
They don't exist as a person, they just exist as an obsessor over the protagonist. It's very annoying.
I have a perfect example of this. So in an anime or in a manga anime called Haikyuu, there are two second years, Tanaka and Nishinoya, and there's the third year manager of the group or of Karasuno, which is her name is Kyoko, and Kyoko is just minding her own business. She's very timid, keeps to herself, but Nishinoya and Tanaka are simps. They're hardcore simps for fucking Kyoko, and it bothers me. It's funny. I admit it. It's funny, but at the same time, when you boil down to it, it's like, oh god, this girl must go through so much shit. I feel so bad.
I guess that's the one exception. I can take it if it's a comic relief character.
Yeah.
I have less tolerance with it if it's supposed to be like a character I'm supposed to seriously get invested in.
Yeah. It's like this badass, it's like this badass like mercenary hunter or something, and suddenly this like pretty person walks by and it's like, oh, well, you know what? Shit's or my entire life is completely different now. I don't want to get revenge. I want to just fuck this person. Like,
It's why I had to stop watching. I quit Future Diary because I can't remember her name, but the main girl in Future Diary was just so obsessed with the protagonist, and I was just like, do you have no other character traits? You just
yeah. It's funny we talk about like having no character traits because moving on to my final pick, it's Marie-Soleil, which is super bothersome for me because like Marie-Soleil, when you think of a Marie-Soleil, you think of like a character with literally no imperfections. They are like 100% like amazing, and they'll carry you through like an action-packed scene, and you don't ever have to worry about them being hurt or being traumatized or whatever. Like, there's no consequences for a Marie-Soleil because they're literally boring. Like, it's so bothering to me because it's like people are afraid to like write flaws for characters, and I'm like, that's what makes your characters unique. It is with their flaws and how they handle like consequences and reactions and all that stuff. If your character is so perfect that they don't even have to worry about any of that, and their entire purpose is to just pull the plot along, then what's the point in even investing in the character? Like, as listeners have been keeping up with, like, I love my characters, but if there's no substance to that character, like if there's no character traits, like you said, Gabe, or if there's no like defining things that humanize this character and make it more like interesting, what's the fucking point? There is none. Like, you really can't invest in Marie-Soleil for very long, because then, yeah, like I was saying, like, you just can't invest in Marie-Soleil. It's hard to, like, it's like, I know that, what was I trying to say? Like, when you think of Star Wars, and I guess at this point my earlier rule of like talking about movies and just sticking to that's out the window. But when you're thinking
listen, we already passed that point when we started talking about harem anime. I hate to break it to you.
Yeah, I know.
This was no longer an intellectual discussion about literature.
Yeah. it's prevalent in all storytelling, right? But like anyway, like when you think of Star Wars, the sequel trilogy with Rey is definitely a Mary Sue. Like, definitely. There's very little that I could really think about in terms of like humanizing her. She seemed very perfect. Like, aside, like, you can't just say that your character has a tragic backstory and expect everyone to like polish or like gloss over her complete and utter like perfections in every other situation. Like, when the fuck did she learn how to pilot the fucking Millennium Falcon? Like, it's something like, I guess across all forms of storytelling where you cannot have a perfect character, otherwise your story will be boring. Like, that's why a lot of people hate Superman. Like, there's only one dumb thing that hurts him. Every other point after that, like, there's how many times can you tell the story of a god becoming a man without it boiling down to just boringness?
What I think is interesting about Superman as an example is that, like, I think a lot of the best Superman fiction sort of solves it by way of the One Punch Man solution for the problem. Because One Punch Man, I know back when One Punch Man started, a lot of the trouble that I ran into when recommending it to people was people were like, oh, so he just beats everything in one punch? Well, that's not very interesting. How am I supposed to get invested in that? And what I found that Superman, a lot of the best Superman comics do that One Punch Man does, is that it makes the conflicts more about like sort of character based and person based, like how Superman has all this amazing power, but he's also a dumb fuck alien trying to live on Earth while being this huge man who can just crush everything accidentally if he wants to. A lot of the more serious Superman media, like Man of Steel, sort of fucks this up because it tries to tell him as a serious protagonist, but then forgets that he can demolish everything by looking at it.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. And I guess the recurring theme of like why my pet peeves are my pet peeves is because I was guilty of it. And my protagonist Porter was 100% a Mary Sue when I first wrote her, and that's just not even touching like the current adaptation of Porter. Like, when I first wrote the entire story in general, back when it was a science fiction, Porter was 100% a Mary Sue. Like, there was nothing really interesting to her. Like, she fought well, and she was like, pretty super badass and shit, but like there was nothing defining about her. There wasn't anything that made her like human, relatable. And like, even then, when I didn't have as good a grasp on storytelling as I do now, like, it was so painfully obvious that it made me quit the entire story. Because if there's nothing worth, like, if I can't even invest in my own protagonist, then how can I expect other people to?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there has to be things about your protagonist that like obviously sets them apart, but also makes them relatable. Like, you want to invest in humans, right? Like, you want to invest in people that are like overconfident or very shy or like flawed, basically. Like, you want to have characters with flaws because that is what makes us people. We're all pretty fucked up, and not just like. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, not just like one of the things that I've noticed that people like a way to like sort of have a character have quote unquote flaws is to have these like sexy flaws, like, ooh, he's a reckless cop who doesn't play by the rules, or ooh, he's a bad boy. But these aren't like actual character flaws, they're just edginess.
Yeah. Like,
yeah, really hoping the cop who doesn't play by the rules trope will be considered considerably less sexy.
I really hope so.
Next few years.
A cab.
I really hope that we just don't have cops as protagonists anymore, or in media.
Anyway, Alex, do you have a third and final pet peeve?
Yes. This one's like really niche, but especially in like fantasy and like speculative fiction, when people have to come up with their own like country names and stuff, and they come up with really bad ones.
Adding all of my previous writings.
Well, okay, no, this is definitely something that came from my own writing, but I also see it in other works, especially like Sarah J. Maas. I'm gonna call her out for this as well. Some of her country names are so bad.
Yeah. I'm okay with Aurelia. Everything else is like, what? Like, what
I remember reading like Throne of Glass, and like Terracin is bad. I don't even remember what the main country's name is called. What, Adarlan? Adarlan. That's what it's called. Adarlan.
Is that how you pronounce it?
That's how it's pronounced. I remember because I was reading the whole book going like, how do you pronounce that? That's another thing. Like pronunciation guides are so nice, which there is one at the first Throne of Glass book, I think, at least in the copy I read.
Yeah, I have one.
But like if your reader is struggling to like pronounce the name of your country throughout like the whole thing, and like if it's like, you know, like a foreign word in like a language that your reader doesn't speak, that's one thing. But if you're like making up a word for it, then, and it's like the whole time your reader's going, how do you pronounce that? Like even looking at the pronunciation guide, then you've got a problem.
Yeah.
Anyway, in Throne of Glass, the main country, I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Adarlan. I remember the whole time I was like, is it pronounced like Adarlane, Adarlan, Adarlan? Like
mine
I just
was like Adarlan. Adarlan. That's wow.
Yeah,
that
it's
really
bad.
changes up how everything, like that really just fucked up my own experience reading the books, and I haven't even finished all of them.
Neither have I.
Yeah.
But like that's definitely one of my pet peeves is, and then this is something else I've seen other people talk about in Sarah J. Maas's books as well, is like her inability to like commit to one specific type of name. Like this was mostly brought up in reference to the Court of Thorns and Roses books, where she has like a mix of like Greek names and then like Celtic names, and kind of like mashes them together in the world when like they're pronounced very differently. Like the main character of that book series is named Feyre, which ends with the letter E, which is pronounced in that case. And then there's another character who's Ianthe, I think, whose name also ends with an E. But in that case, because it's a name of like Greek origin, it's pronounced E instead of like it is in the Celtic origin. And like there's not even like an excuse of, oh, they're from two different countries where they would have that kind of thing, like that have that kind of like linguistic difference.
Yeah, artistic liberty really only goes so far and is only so excusable, right?
Yeah, so that's definitely one of my pet peeves is like making up names in fantasy, or in some cases not making up names in fantasy, and like how you use them.
Yeah, I think it's predominantly with, I guess, fantasy and like sci-fi, like really imaginative series where you have to like expand on, like, you know, make sure everyone doesn't have John as a name, or not every place is called New York. Yeah, right, because that'd be one thing. That'd be a huge bother if you were set, like if you had an entire fantasy setting with like gorgeous settings and stuff, and your fucking like capital's Chicago. That ain't gonna fly. Yeah, like I get it. Like for me, like as someone who has done a lot of like my book Xeno is fantasy. And so like it's imperative that every word that I've either made up or like I've based it off of something has a pronunciation guide to the best of my own ability, right? Because, you know, I can understand like how I say it is probably going to be completely different to how someone else is saying it. So,
and obviously that's something I struggle with too, because like I have my whole planet where I've literally made up words and meanings for like all the different names and countries and stuff. But yeah, that's something I've struggled with too, like because obviously I created my world when I was pretty young. And so a lot of my original names for the places were just like absolutely terrible. And so that's something that I've gone back multiple times and like tried to make better, just because I want the names to be pronounceable, I want them to be consistent, I want them to be unique, but I also want them to evoke like certain certain images.
Yeah.
And so I think like coming up with names in your fantasy and sci-fi stories is something that's really important, and a lot of people don't take it seriously enough.
Yeah, like you don't want people scratching their heads trying to just say someone or say like pronounce the name of your country for the entirety of the book. Like you want it to be a one and done thing, or you mess up once and then you kind of pick it up from there. Like you want it to be like relatively easy to say and not to like, I'm just going off on a tangent, but like, yeah, just if, I guess for fantasy writers out there, like if you're going to invent countries and languages and names, like be mindful that how you pronounce things has to make at least enough sense so that your audience can definitely keep up with you, because then it's just going to be like a pet peeve for them. If like for this great book that may have like an awesome story and great characters that they can't even pronounce anything.
Yeah, and that's something I'm still struggling with, because like I will say like, oh, my main character's name is Alehe, but even I mess it up sometimes.
Yeah.
I still think to an extent, even if you have something like that, I think it's important to be consistent.
Yeah.
Like if you have like if your names are all over the place and like you have the same letter pronounced like 700 different ways or whatever, then it's going to be a lot more confusing than if it's consistent, even if it's hard to pronounce.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Gabe, how about you? What would your third and final pick be?
My third pick, it's a pretty simple one, but it's something that really bugs me. Even though it's a very small thing. Protagonist,
pet peeves, so.
Protagonist has heterochromia.
Oh my god.
I am...
I am awake. I feel it.
I don't think I've read many stories with that, actually.
Every time I do read one, I'm like, oh, really? Does he? Does she? Do they have heterochromia?
Yeah.
Really? How? What an interesting trait to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
That tells me so much about this character's personality. Probably how they're not like other girls, TM, and have heterochromia because ooh, they have two sides to them. Ooh, they're secretive.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Like, I guess to open up that conversation a little bit more, like
tired, Gabe.
Yeah, I guess just to like open up that conversation, like heterochromia is like what's a term that I can kind of like use for the rest of this podcast, but like it's a defining feature. It's an unnecessary defining feature that doesn't really overall like it's too like there are many issues with it. Basically, like we had talked about this in a previous episode, but focusing on just eyes and to drag Sarah J. Maas a little bit more than we already have. The main character, Selena / Aelin, has unique turquoise gold eyes, and it's like, oh, wow,
like
amazing.
Kate, it's really bad in those books too, because it's noted that like her eyes are specific to her specific family, meaning there's like 3 people in the whole world that have like that eye color, and she's under the nose of someone who's like been hunting her down her whole life, and this is never noticed by that person.
Yeah, like it's like defining characteristics that kind of help separate your character from everyone else's, but at the same time, like, what really was the point of it anyway? Like, is it just to make your character look cool and to stand out with like that? Like, and that's just the general question. If
you want to like address something about a character's personality through their physical appearance, I just feel like heterochromia is such a like cheap way to do it. It's just like it's just someone has heterochromia, and it's like, okay, they have two sides to them. I don't know. I feel like there are ways that you can address someone's personality through their physical appearance in ways that are more engaging than their fucking eye colors are different.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, do you have like specific examples of this? Because like literally, I can think of one book series I've ever read where the main character had heterochromia.
Yeah, the weird thing is I can't offhand. I just know it. I just know.
I'm willing to defend this in the comments. Trust me.
Yeah, I will come up. It's one of those things. The thing is, I can't come up with examples because I don't think I've finished a single book that starts with I have heterochromia.
I guess maybe those are just the books that we haven't come across yet, or either of us, or like any of us really, because I don't know anyone's, but I understand it.
I know that I must know some. For the life of me, I can't think of a specific one offhand right now, but I just know.
Yeah, I found the book series that I read where the main character had heterochromia. They're called The Companions Quartet by Julia Golding. And they're like one of those like, oh, every myth you know is true kind of stories where there's like these people who are like who can like talk to mythical creatures and stuff. And the main character had heterochromia, and then also her love interest had heterochromia, and they had like matching opposite sets of eyes. Like both of them had like a blue eye and a brown eye, I think.
Wow, if their eyes touched, they could just switch and not have heterochromia.
I can think of like a video game character, Moira. She has heterochromia.
From
Overwatch.
I feel so stupid that the only thing I can think of right now is Naruto.
Yeah, but like that's the thing too. It's like they have two. I get I get why it's a pet peeve. It's like they have two different eyes. Okay, and
yeah,
where's the substance?
I feel like if you're gonna do something like that, it needs to have a purpose. Like I definitely have some characters that have that. Like I have one character I can think of off the top of my head. Her name's Reina. And the reason she has heterochromia is because she's like a half vampire, and like the way that vampirism and like that kind of stuff works in this particular world is it kind of like takes over slowly. So like one of her eyes is like a red vampire eye, and the other one is like a normal eye, but it's slowly being taken over by the vampirism. So eventually she won't have heterochromia anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if it's just this one thing that's just there because it looks cool. I don't like it.
I think I mentioned this in a different episode that we did, but I think what I said was like you can accomplish what you want to accomplish with heterochromia with an eye patch, and it will number one look way cooler, and number two say way more about the character through their like backstory and shit.
I think most of my characters that have heterochromia also wear eye patches. With like one exception I can think of.
All right.
Funny actually. And usually it's because they had like an injury to their eye that caused discoloration.
Mm-hmm.
Cover up with the eye patch, and not just because they have heterochromia for the sake of it.
Yeah. Like if you're going to do something to your character, like there has to be some kind of conviction to it. Like if it's one thing if it's just there just for like appearance's sake and to make this character stand out, like that's one thing. But like if you're just gonna insert it there, try to come up with some half-ass conviction, but no one's buying it, it's like then why even put it in the first place, right? Like with your character that's a half vampire, like that's a pretty cool way of having two different eye colors. It makes sense. But like for other characters it's like, oh, they have two different colored eyes. Okay, why? Oh, I don't know, it just looks cool. I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna read your book then. Or I'm not gonna invest in your story then. What?
You're brutal. That's brutal.
It could be a great book, but like if you're just inserting shit for no reason, then it's not a good book in general. Like it could be a critically acclaimed, and this is a whole other thing, but like you could have a critically acclaimed book that like a bunch of people love. But if there are things that, like, if you really start to nitpick at it, like if you read the critically acclaimed book and you start to nitpick, like, I guess just like characters, like if your character ends up being a Mary Sue, then it's like, what the fuck? Why did this book get all the praise?
Yeah,
it deserved, right? Like if it's like a shallow character with like very little like reasoning behind their creation, it's like, what the hell?
And I guess that's why I say it's not like it's a pet peeve, because I mean, I'm sure if someone makes a really good book with a heterochromia protection, I'm sure I've read something where a character has heterochromia and I just can't remember it right now because it's the middle of the night, I'm a little drunk, and I've been playing Xenoblade Chronicles all day. But like, I'm sure I've read something that where like a good or a really good character had heterochromia. I don't know. I think whenever I notice it, it does bug me because.
Wait. Like, Gabe, you're familiar with Devil May Cry, right? Doesn't Lady have?
No, don't talk shit.
I'm not talking shit. I'm just saying, like, doesn't she have it? Like, I'm just remembering.
Yes.
Okay. I don't want to start a flame war, dude. I'm just asking. Please don't kill me.
Oh, okay. I looked up list of fictional characters with heterochromia. Rick Riordan's done it.
Okay.
Yeah. See, that's it. I've read like Percy Jackson books, and I love those books. I'm sure someone had heterochromia at one point, and I just
from Alex Fierro from the Magnus Chase books, who's like one of my favorite characters. But again, it's probably literally like the character's gender fluid, and is noted to have like the two sides kind of thing going on. So I can see where you're coming from with that. Mm-hmm. She's still one of my favorite characters, though.
All right.
There's not a lot of them.
Yeah. I think on that point, though, I think we'll. I think that's a good way to end it. So, thanks for listening, everyone. This has been another hectic recording, I guess, as it always will be. You can follow our social media down below. We have the Ink Guild on Twitter and Instagram, as well as our respective social media. And I guess as a final sign off, I want to do something fun for it. So each of us has a minute to state our claim as to why romantic subplots, which I guess is like a pet peeve between the three of us in general, why we should stop doing that. We each have a minute to pretty much stake our claim to abolish romantic subplots. Sound good?
Yep, I have a stopwatch ready.
Okay, so I'll go first. Just Gabe, let me know when I can, or when.
All right, go.
So, romantic subplots are not needed anymore. There's so much diversity there's so much that you can do with characters nowadays that you don't even need to acknowledge any kind of romantic relationship between them. You can have badass ace characters, for example. You could have like awesome character relationships that in no way need to be romantic. You can have platonic badass relationships, friendships, whatever. Like, things can work out without the need to be with each other, because nowadays, hell, some people don't even want to be near their others. So like, why the fuck do you want to read that in your book? So abolish it. We don't need it. I think especially in fantasy too. We don't need fantasy romance subplots anymore. There's so much more shit going on in the fantasy world. Don't fucking need that shit. It's too much to deal with. And I get that, like, in YA, yeah, fine. Like, we all go through our shit. But at the same time, there's other things to worry about. I finished. We're good. I was on the dot. I wasn't even keeping time, to be honest. So I'm glad that you got it. Okay. Alex, your turn. On Gabe's mark.
I can keep my own time. It's fine.
On your mark.
Okay. We don't need romance subplots in stories anymore. It's all been done before. Also, again, friendships are important. I'd love to see more like queer platonic relationships and stories because you like never see those ever. And what else is there to say about it? Also, all of your romance subplots are bad. I'm sorry, but they are. They've been done, they've been overdone. They're not interesting. They're all the same. If I want to read romance, I will go to the romance section and pick up a romance book. When I'm reading fantasy novels, I want that fantasy stuff. I don't care about romance when there's a big war going on or when there's magic discoveries going on. There's more important things to focus on. Also, your point about YA stuff is irrelevant because when I was a teenager, I had zero interest in romance. And I stand by that. We don't need romance in stories.
I'm applauding. That was good. All right. We got a drunken Gabe to close us off. You ready?
I got my timer ready.
Okay.
Okay, so here's the thing about sex in fiction. You don't need to have a fucking sex scene. Sex scenes are irrelevant and useless. And I know we're talking about romance subplots, but what the fuck? All romance subplots lead here eventually. And that's the whole reason that fucking so many writers want to do them is because writers want to have a bunch of sex scenes. They want to have a sex scene in the fiction. They want to have characters be horny. But guess what? Sex scenes are boring and uninteresting. Because guess what? Everyone's fucking done it. Everyone knows what the fuck is going on there. You know what not everyone knows what's going on there? Is a fight scene or an action scene or a chase scene. There's so much shit that you can accomplish with a more interesting scene that you choose to do with a sex scene. Just to be a fucking horny on your keyboard. It's stupid and useless. Because guess what? If I was horny, I'm not gonna go to my fucking bookshelf and peruse my novels. I'm gonna fucking go to the internet if I am in the mood and I'm done.
Honestly, I'll second that though. We need less sex scenes in YA fantasy novels, especially.
I third that. And with all of that being said, thanks for listening, everyone. Have a good night.